The rain had just stopped when a black sedan rolled through the quiet streets of Northbridge Hills. It was the kind of neighborhood where porch lights burned low, lawns stayed trimmed, and strangers were noticed before they even parked. Inside, that car sat Rachel Carter, calm, deliberate, and dressed like someone with somewhere important to be. Her phone buzzed beside her, lighting up with messages from the Justice Department. She didn't glance at it. She already knew what tomorrow would bring. Tomorrow, her investigation would explode, one that reached deep into the roots of state law enforcement. But tonight, something else was waiting. A flash of blue lights flooded her rearview mirror, the kind of blue that made your chest tighten. Rachel sighed, slowed her car, and pulled over. Her mind ran through the possibilities. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't crossed a line. Still, she rolled down her window, steady and polite. A police cruiser stopped behind her, 2 officers stepping out. Their boots hit the wet asphalt with the confidence of men who thought they owned the night. License and registration, the first officer barked, leaning too far into her window. His badge read Officer Reynolds. The other one, Sergeant Hale, hung back, arms crossed, smirking. Rachel handed over her ID without hesitation. Her movements were calm, trained. Years in the courtroom had taught her to stay collected no matter how hostile the room. Reynolds glanced at her license, then at her, his brow furrowed. "What are you doing around here this late?" "I'm heading home," Rachel said simply. He looked at the address again. Then he looked at her skin. Something shifted in his tone. "You live around here?" "Yes," she replied evenly. He snorted. "Nice neighborhood." His partner laughed under his breath. Rachel kept her eyes on the dashboard, her breathing steady. She knew this game. And she knew how fast it could turn ugly. When Reynolds told her to step out of the car, she didn't argue. She unbuckled, stepped into the cool night air, and felt the sudden chill of power shift. The handcuffs came out before she could ask why. Cold metal locked around her wrists. "You're being detained," Reynolds said flatly. "Suspicious activity." "Suspicious?" she repeated, voice calm but edged. "For what reason?" "Driving through a neighborhood that's not yours," Hale replied. Rachel didn't resist. She didn't shout. She only watched as they searched her car, their flashlights darting across the seats, her briefcase, her folders, everything. Inside those folders lay sealed evidence from a federal corruption case. Records, wiretaps, names of officers under investigation. Including Reynolds. Including Hale. They didn't know it yet, but their careers were in those files. Evidence that would have ended them by morning. Instead, they dragged her toward the cruiser, unaware they were arresting the very woman investigating them. As she sat in the back seat behind a steel cage meant for criminals, Rachel's wrists throbbed from the cuffs. Her mind didn't rage. It calculated. Every insult, every violation, every word. Years in federal prosecution had taught her one thing. Justice isn't loud. It's patient. It builds case by case, fact by fact, until the truth becomes undeniable. Reynolds turned up the radio. Hale laughed, saying something about teaching people their place. They had no idea whose place they had just challenged. No idea the woman in their backseat could end their careers with a single phone call. No idea she wasn't a lawyer. She was the state's lead special prosecutor for public integrity and civil rights. As the car pulled into the precinct, Rachel looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. 20 years of defending justice hadn't prepared her for this, but she would use it, every second of it. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights hummed. The walls were yellowed with age, the air thick with disinfectant and arrogance. The desk sergeant barely looked up. "Name? Dr. Rachel Carter," she said. The sergeant frowned. "Doctor? In what?" "Law," she replied, her voice steady. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. "Lawyer," one of them muttered. "Sure you are." Officer Reynolds leaned against the wall. "You people all think you're somebody." Rachel said nothing. Her silence was heavier than anger. She knew silence could be evidence. As the fingerprint scanner pressed against her skin, she remembered her father's words. Words he'd said the night she graduated from law school. Never fight power with rage. Fight it with records. She smiled faintly. Tonight power had just handed her everything she needed. Reynolds gestured toward the cell. "Enjoy your stay, counselor." She looked at him once. "I will." Behind her, Hale called out, "Maybe, next time, you'll think twice before driving where you don't belong." Rachel turned her head just slightly. "I always drive exactly where I belong." The steel door closed with a sound that echoed through the precinct. They thought they'd humiliated her. But what they'd done was far worse. They'd made her witness it firsthand. They'd just turned the prosecutor into the victim. And when that happens, justice doesn't just return. It comes back with evidence. The night dragged on inside the precinct. The smell of stale coffee mixed with sweat and the faint metallic tang of handcuffs. Rachel sat on a hard bench inside the holding cell, her wrists still sore, her mind completely awake. The walls were gray, chipped, and echoing with laughter from down the hall. The sound wasn't cruel in a loud way, it was cruel in its carelessness. Outside the cell, the officers joked about her attitude, pretending not to care, pretending the uniform still meant control. Reynolds bragged to a young recruit about how he'd put a lawyer in her place. Hale added that she was lucky they hadn't impounded her car. The young recruit laughed, trying to fit in, but in his eyes there was hesitation, a flicker of doubt he didn't want anyone to see. Rachel caught that look when he passed her cell. She gave him nothing but silence in return. Silence, she'd learned, makes people think. Every few minutes, a new voice echoed through the precinct, paperwork shuffling, phones ringing, doors closing. It was routine chaos, the kind of night that felt ordinary to everyone but her. Yet something extraordinary was already in motion. Across the room, Detective Clara Davis sat behind her desk, half watching, half listening. She wasn't like the others. She'd been on the force long enough to notice patterns, long enough to sense when something was off. Tonight, something was. The woman in that cell, she didn't behave like most detainees. She wasn't scared or defensive. She wasn't broken down by insults or silence. She just waited, calmly, deliberately, like someone waiting for a meeting, not a release. Clara leaned back in her chair, watching through the narrow glass window. "What's her charge again?" she asked. Reynolds didn't even look up from his paperwork. "Suspicious behavior, failure to comply. You know, the usual." "The usual," Clara repeated quietly. She opened the booking record on her screen. No priors, no warrants. Registered address in a wealthy part of town. Education, Harvard Law, employment, Department of Justice. Her pulse quickened. She read it again, slower. Department of Justice. That wasn't possible, she thought. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe fake. But the ID had checked out. She looked at Rachel again, this time differently. Meanwhile, Sergeant Hale swaggered past the cell. "You want your phone call?" he asked, mocking. "Yes," Rachel replied. "That would be the legal protocol, wouldn't it?" "Phone's down," he said. "Maintenance issue." Rachel tilted her head slightly. How convenient. Her calm tone unsettled him. He turned away, muttering under his breath. She closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. Years in the courtroom had made her immune to intimidation. But deep inside there was something burning, an anger she rarely let surface. Not because of fear, but because she understood what power really was. Power wasn't loud, it was deliberate. And tonight, she would remember every word, every insult, every illegal action. Davis stood. "Sergeant, we got a problem with the booking," she said. Hale frowned. "What problem?" "I ran her info through the federal database. She's clean, and her credentials check out. She's DOJ. Reynolds laughed. "Yeah, right. Everyone says that when they're caught. Next, she'll tell you she's the president." "No," Davis said quietly. "She's not lying." The laughter around the room thinned out. Hale crossed his arms. "So what? If she's some lawyer, she'll get her fine. maybe a complaint, and go home. Davis didn't answer. Her instincts told her this was bigger. The DOJ didn't send prosecutors into neighborhoods like this without a reason. Rachel sat up straighter, noticing the shift in the room. She could tell when authority started to wobble. The energy had changed. Someone had checked her name. Someone had found something. Through the glass, Davis met her eyes for the first time. It wasn't hostility, it was recognition, a silent acknowledgement between two women who understood the weight of institutions. Rachel spoke softly, but her words carried through the room. "You should let me make that call." Davis hesitated. "To who?" Rachel looked directly at her. The Attorney General's office. The silence that followed was deafening. Hale slammed a folder shut. "This is ridiculous, she's bluffing." But Davis didn't move. Her gaze stayed on Rachel's face. "If she's not bluffing," she said slowly, "we're in trouble." "Trouble?" Reynolds scoffed. "You think some fancy lawyer's gonna shut down a whole precinct?" Rachel's calm voice cut through the tension. "You'd be surprised what one lawyer can do with the truth." Hale turned toward her, voice rising. "You don't get to lecture us. You're the one in the cell." Rachel's reply was almost a whisper. "For now." Every word she spoke seemed to settle into the air like weight. The young recruit who had laughed earlier suddenly found the floor very interesting. Davis returned to her desk, fingers trembling as she typed another search. The name came up again. Dr. Rachel Carter, Federal Prosecutor, Civil Rights Division, Lead Investigator, Public Integrity Task Force. Her throat went dry. She looked at Reynolds. "You need to stop what you're doing." He rolled his eyes. "Detective, you're overreacting." "No," she said firmly. "You just arrested the woman investigating half this department." The color drained from his face. Rachel leaned back against the wall, her calm never breaking. She'd seen it happen before. Those moments when confidence curdled into fear. From her seat in the cell, she could see the clock above the door ticking forward. Every second mattered now, because somewhere across the city, her absence had already triggered alerts. Federal protocols would be in motion. Somewhere in the Justice Department, a system had already noticed she hadn't checked in. And once that signal reached the right people, the world around this precinct would change. No one inside that room knew it yet. But their night had just shifted from routine to ruin. Clara Davis closed the booking record and whispered to herself, "God help us all." Rachel heard it. She smiled faintly. "Help is already on the way." The sound of her voice wasn't a boast. It was a promise. The kind of promise that meant the night wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The clock above the booking desk ticked louder than usual. Each second felt stretched, as if the building itself could sense something closing in. Outside, the night deepened, rain misting against the windows. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting brief shadows over faces that were no longer confident. Detective Davis stood near her desk, scrolling through the Federal Registry again, hoping she'd made some mistake. But there it was, line after line confirming it. Dr. Rachel Carter, Senior Federal Prosecutor, Civil Rights and Public Integrity Division. The very unit that specialized in investigating local law enforcement. Reynolds tried to laugh it off, but the sound died halfway through. "She's bluffing," he said again, though even he didn't sound convinced. "She had those papers in the car. Probably forged them. People fake badges all the time." Davis turned the screen toward him. "You think the Department of Justice website is faking it too?" Reynolds' face paled. His mouth opened, then closed again. The room was suddenly too quiet. Rachel sat still behind the bars, her eyes following every movement outside the cell. She saw the fear settle in, the quick glances, the whispers, the weight of sudden realization. It was familiar. She had seen that same look in courtrooms right before the verdict was read. Sergeant Hale slammed a drawer shut. "All right, everyone relax. Even if she is who she says, it doesn't matter. We've got a process. We'll sort it out before anyone makes this a big deal." Davis gave him a long look. "You planted drugs in her car, didn't you?" The words hit the air like a slap. Reynolds froze. Hale turned slowly. "Watch your mouth, detective. Tell me I'm wrong," Davis pressed. "Tell me those drugs came from her." No one spoke. Rachel's gaze didn't waver. "That evidence will be tested. Chain of custody will be examined, and when it leads back to you, there's no badge in the world that will protect you. Hale's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You think you can threaten me from a cell? It's not a threat, Rachel said calmly. It's procedure. The young recruit at the front desk whispered to another officer. She's serious, isn't she? She's something worse than serious, the other replied. She's connected. Davis rubbed her temple. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her voice low. If she's logged as missing, this entire place is about to be under a federal spotlight. How long does that take? Reynolds asked, his voice trembling despite the forced calm. Rachel answered for her. Hours. Maybe less. She looked up toward the ceiling as if she could almost hear the distant hum of servers, the quiet digital storm gathering above them. Federal systems didn't sleep. Every DOJ prosecutor carried location beacons, emergency codes, and contact patterns. Her silence alone would have triggered a review by now. Outside, thunder rolled again. The sound rattled the windows. Captain Evelyn Ward entered the room, her coat still damp from the rain. She scanned the faces, instantly sensing the tension. What's going on here? Hale straightened up. Routine stop, Captain. Just a lawyer with a bad attitude. Davis turned toward her. Captain, that lawyer is a federal prosecutor. Civil Rights Division. Ward's expression didn't change, but the air around her seemed to freeze. She looked toward the cell. Rachel met her gaze evenly. Is that true? Ward asked. Yes, Rachel said. And I need to make my phone call. Ward took a slow breath. What division did you say? Public Integrity, Rachel answered. We investigate systemic misconduct within law enforcement. For the first time in years, Captain Ward couldn't find words. Her mind flashed through briefings she'd read, names she'd heard whispered at city meetings. Public Integrity was the federal task force that ended careers. The last department they touched had been dismantled. Hale spoke up, trying to regain footing. She's exaggerating. She was found acting suspicious in a restricted area. We followed protocol. Rachel tilted her head slightly. Your protocol includes false charges, unlawful detention, and evidence fabrication? Ward turned on Hale. What evidence? He hesitated, then reached into a folder and pulled out a small, clear bag. Inside it, a white powder. Davis exhaled sharply. You didn't. Ward snatched the bag. Where'd this come from? Her car, Hale muttered. Rachel's voice cut through the air like a knife. Under legal documents sealed by the Department of Justice. You'll find my fingerprints on the papers, not the bag. Ward stared at the evidence, realization dawning too fast to ignore. You idiots, she whispered. Do you have any idea who she is? What this means? Reynolds spoke in a low voice. We didn't know. Knowing isn't the issue, Davis snapped. Doing it is. Rachel stood slowly, stepping closer to the bars. You've made mistakes before, she said quietly. But tonight you made a federal one. Ward's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen and froze. The caller ID said Deputy Attorney General's office, she answered, voice stiff. This is Captain Ward. The voice on the other end was calm, but it carried authority that silenced the entire room. Captain, we're aware of the unlawful detention of Dr. Rachel Carter. You will release her immediately. Do not attempt to contact her or destroy any evidence. Federal agents are en route. Ward swallowed hard. Understood. The call ended. She looked at the officers around her. None could meet her eyes. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze softened. Not with pity, but with inevitability. The difference between power and justice, she said quietly, is that justice doesn't need permission. Davis turned toward her captain. What now? Ward exhaled, staring at the floor. Now we wait. Outside, the sound of sirens began faintly in the distance, not police sirens, but deeper, more deliberate federal sirens that moved with precision. Rachel sat back down on the bench, her wrists resting loosely in her lap. Every breath she took was calm, measured. She wasn't angry anymore. She was preparing. Every word spoken tonight, every action taken, every lie told, it was already evidence. The system she helped build was about to do exactly what it was designed to do. And by dawn, this precinct would no longer belong to them. The sirens grew louder, rolling in like a storm that couldn't be stopped. Everyone in the precinct froze. It wasn't fear of danger, it was fear of recognition. They knew that sound. It wasn't local. It wasn't city patrol. It was federal. Captain Ward stood motionless, eyes fixed on the front doors as the lights outside painted the walls red and blue. For a second, no one breathed. Then the heavy glass doors swung open and a wave of dark suits filled the room. Their badges flashed under the harsh fluorescent glow. "Federal agents," the woman in front said firmly. "Everyone step away from the desks. No phones." No files moved. Her name was Agent Lauren Pierce, lead investigator for the Federal Public Integrity Unit. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence in her voice did the work for her. Behind her, half a dozen agents spread out with practiced precision. They knew exactly where to go, what to seize, and who to question. They'd been preparing for this for months. Rachel had seen to that long before tonight. Rachel remained seated in the cell, calm and patient, as if she'd been waiting for her cue. Agent Pierce walked straight toward Captain Ward. "Where is she?" Ward hesitated, then pointed toward the holding area. "Cell 2. Pierce turned her head slightly. "Open it." Ward unlocked the door with a trembling hand. The metal clanged open, echoing through the tense silence. Rachel stood and stepped out, her posture steady, her gaze unwavering. Pierce's tone softened just slightly. "Dr. Carter, are you all right?" "I am," Rachel said. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Pierce nodded once. "Your signal triggered the alert automatically. We've been tracking the location since the first missed check-in." Rachel looked past her toward the officers who had arrested her. Hale, Reynolds, and the others stood lined against the far wall, silent now, their earlier arrogance gone. They looked small under the weight of the moment. Pierce faced them. "Who was responsible for this detention?" No one answered. Davis finally spoke up. Sergeant Hale initiated the stop. Officer Reynolds assisted. Pierce's sharp eyes turned toward them. "Then they'll start by surrendering their weapons and badges," Reynolds stammered. "We didn't know who she was." Pierce's voice stayed calm. "You didn't have to. You just had to follow the law." Hale took a step forward. "We were doing our jobs." Rachel's voice broke the air before Pierce could respond. "Your job doesn't include planting evidence. It doesn't include lying on reports or denying someone their rights. You don't uphold the law by breaking it." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried. Every word landed heavy. Even the agents paused to listen. Captain Ward tried to intervene. "Agent Pierce, we can handle internal discipline." Pierce cut her off. "This isn't internal anymore, Captain. This is federal jurisdiction." Ward's shoulders slumped. She knew it was over. Rachel walked toward her briefcase sitting on the evidence shelf. An agent retrieved it and handed it to her carefully. She opened it, flipping through the papers inside, subpoenas, transcripts, lists of names. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "These documents were part of an ongoing investigation into corruption within this department. I didn't expect to become part of the evidence myself." Pierce gave a tight nod. "We'll make sure your experience is fully documented. The Justice Department wants a full report by morning." Davis stepped forward, her voice quiet. "Agent Pierce, I'd like to cooperate. I knew something was wrong here for a long time. I can show you files, recordings, internal memos." Pierce studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Start gathering everything. Full transparency will be noted." Rachel turned to Davis. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing what others ignored." As Davis hurried off, the agents began collecting hard drives, printed logs, and body cam footage. They opened drawers, copied records, sealed evidence bags. The precinct that once felt like a fortress was being emptied piece by piece. Outside, more federal vehicles arrived. The morning air had started to gray, a thin layer of mist rising off the wet streets. Reporters were already assembling beyond the barricades. Inside, Hale and Reynolds sat at the booking desk, wrists cuffed, waiting. Their faces were pale, their eyes darting around the room. Everything they'd once controlled now surrounded them like a cage. Rachel stood in the hallway watching them quietly. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply remembered every detail. "Justice," she said under her breath, "takes its time, but it never forgets." Pierce approached. "We'll be moving them to federal custody within the hour. You'll be debriefed at the district office." Rachel nodded. "The Attorney General will want a full record of the arrest. Make sure the files include the timeline, the radio chatter, and their refusal of counsel." Pierce's expression softened again. "Already done?" "We've been listening since the signal went out." That surprised even Rachel. She gave a small nod of approval. "Good." From across the room, Captain Ward looked up. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, her voice trembling, We made a mistake. Rachel met her gaze steady and unflinching. No, Captain. You made a choice. The captain dropped her eyes. The building hummed with the low murmur of voices, papers rustling, camera shutters clicking. It was the sound of control being replaced by accountability. By sunrise, the federal agents had finished their sweep. The walls of the precinct that once held power now held evidence. And standing in the middle of it all was the woman they had tried to humiliate. Her presence a reminder of what justice truly looked like. Calm, relentless, and inevitable. As Rachel stepped outside into the morning light, the cold air hit her face. She inhaled deeply, then glanced at the horizon. Somewhere beyond the city, the Attorney General's secure line was already flashing. Calls would be made, files would be opened, names would fall. She walked toward one of the unmarked cars waiting by the curb. Pierce opened the door for her. You did good work, Rachel. Even when they tried to break you, Rachel looked at her. They didn't break me. They proved me right. She got in, closed the door, and the car pulled away. Behind her, the precinct stood silent under the dawn sky. Federal agents remained, cataloging evidence that would fuel indictments and hearings for months. And inside those cold gray walls, the officers who once laughed now waited for the same system they had mocked to decide their fate. For Rachel, the night wasn't about revenge. It was about proof that the law could still work, that truth still mattered, and that silence, recorded, remembered, and written down, was the loudest weapon of all. As the car disappeared into traffic, a thin beam of sunlight broke through the clouds. The day had finally begun, but for everyone left inside the precinct, it marked the beginning of the end. 3 months later, the federal courthouse in Crescent City was surrounded by news vans and cameras. The morning air buzzed with voices, speculation, and the faint hum of justice about to be delivered. Inside, rows of benches filled with reporters, lawyers, and citizens who had followed every headline since that night. The case had a name now: the Carter Inquiry. Rachel walked through the courthouse doors in a dark suit, her expression steady but calm. She had testified before, argued before, won before, but this time felt different. This time the evidence had her fingerprints all over it. Not as a criminal, but as a witness, as living proof of what the system could do when it finally faced itself. At the defense table sat Hale, Reynolds, and Captain Ward, each in pressed suits that did nothing to hide their fear. Their badges were gone. Their names were whispered with contempt. Behind them sat former colleagues avoiding eye contact. The judge entered. All rise, everyone stood. The sound of footsteps echoed against marble walls. The weight of the room settled into silence as the judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the files before her. This court convenes to address the charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, falsification of evidence, and deprivation of rights under color of law, she said evenly. The defendants will remain seated. Rachel took her place at the prosecution table beside Agent Pierce and 2 other attorneys from the Justice Department. Her papers were arranged neatly, but she barely looked at them. The facts were burned into her memory. The evidence had been built not by her hands alone, but by the arrogance of the people sitting across from her. When the time came to speak, she rose slowly. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear, these defendants once carried the authority to enforce the law. They used it instead to violate it. They used power not to protect but to humiliate. They treated justice as a weapon, not a promise. The courtroom hung on her words. Every sentence was deliberate, each one carrying the weight of nights spent watching the system work against itself. They believed that silence would protect them, she continued. They believed that paperwork could bury the truth. But every decision leaves a trace, every abuse leaves evidence, and every victim remembers. I was not their first, but I was their last, because the difference between power and justice, she said, pausing long enough for every eye to meet hers, is that justice doesn't forget. The defense tried to paint the arrest as a misunderstanding, a procedural error. Their lawyer spoke with forced composure, insisting that the officers had no malicious intent, that the planted evidence was a breakdown in communication. Rachel listened, hands folded, her expression calm but unyielding. When her turn came again, she simply said, "Intent does not erase consequence." One by one, the federal agents who had raided the precinct testified. Recordings were played, radio chatter from that night. Body cam footage showing the false discovery of drugs, internal memos linking Captain Ward to falsified arrest quotas. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer. When Detective Davis took the stand, her voice shook, but her words were steady. I saw what was happening for months. I tried to speak up, but they shut me down. When Dr. Carter was arrested, I knew it was over. That was the moment I decided to tell the truth. The defense lawyer objected several times. The judge overruled them all. By afternoon, the weight of evidence had crushed any illusion of innocence. The jury sat frozen, their faces pale and unreadable, the verdict already written in their expressions. The judge looked up from her notes. This court finds the defendants guilty on all counts. The words fell like stones. Hale's shoulders collapsed forward. Reynolds looked to the ceiling as if expecting mercy from above. Captain Ward closed her eyes. The badges that had once shielded them were now the symbols of their downfall. Sentencing came swiftly. 8 years for Reynolds, 10 for Hale, 12 for Ward. None spoke. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Rachel exited into the bright afternoon light. The noise of the press roared around her, but she moved calmly through it. She wasn't interested in fame. Justice didn't need applause, it needed endurance. At the bottom of the courthouse steps stood Davis, now promoted to captain of the newly reformed precinct. She looked younger somehow, lighter. It's over, she said quietly. Rachel shook her head. No, it started. Real justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins there. Davis smiled faintly. We're rewriting how things work. Training's different. Oversight's stricter. It's not perfect, but it's real. Rachel nodded. That's all it needs to be. Real. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the city moving around them, the courthouse looming behind like a monument to everything lost and regained. Weeks later, new programs were launched across the state: community review boards, civilian oversight committees, mandatory transparency audits. Rachel's case had become the blueprint for reform. In her office at the Justice Department, Rachel sat surrounded by files from other districts, places just like Crescent City, where the truth was still buried, waiting to be unearthed. She opened a new folder and read the first line: Preliminary Evidence of Misconduct, Weston County. Her phone buzzed. It was her father, the Attorney General. His voice came through calm and proud. You did good work. Rachel smiled faintly. We're not done yet, he laughed softly. Justice never is. When she hung up, she looked out the window. The city skyline stretched into gold light. Below, sirens sounded faintly, but this time they weren't coming for her. They were carrying out the law she believed in. She leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of everything settle. That night in the cell felt like a lifetime ago. Yet she could still hear the echo of the door closing, still remember the cold of the cuffs, but she also remembered the warmth of dawn and the sound of truth arriving. She whispered to herself, Justice doesn't need heroes. It just needs people who don't stop. And as the city lights flickered on, Rachel opened the next case file. The work continued, steady as her breath, quiet as her strength, unstoppable as the truth itself. The sun had long set over Crescent City, and the skyline glowed with streaks of amber and blue. The courthouse steps were empty now, the crowd gone, the noise replaced by silence. But justice never truly went quiet. It simply shifted its voice. In her office, Rachel sat beneath the low hum of fluorescent lights. Files lay stacked across her desk, each one a name, a department, a story waiting for light. The federal clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. Most of the building was dark, but she was still there, reading, marking, remembering. A soft knock broke the quiet. It was Davis, now wearing the captain's insignia that once belonged to Ward. She looked tired but composed, a calm that comes only when guilt has turned into purpose. Couldn't sleep? Rachel asked. Davis shook her head. I was driving past the old precinct. It's strange seeing the building dark, empty, like it's waiting for something that isn't coming back. Rachel closed the file in front of her. It's waiting for truth, and truth takes its time. Davis sat across from her. They asked me to lead the new integrity unit. Internal Affairs reports directly to the State Oversight Board now. I'm going to take it, Rachel smiled. Good, you'll make it honest. That's rarer than it should be. For a moment, the two women sat in quiet understanding. No speeches, no celebration. Just the slow exhale of two people who had seen the system bend and managed to pull it back. But before the silence could settle, Rachel's phone buzzed. The secure line. She answered instantly. "This is Carter." A firm male voice spoke. "We have a situation in Monroe County. Early reports suggest similar patterns. Fabricated arrests, planted evidence, racial targeting. We need you on site by morning." Rachel's expression didn't change, but her pulse quickened. "How deep?" "Preliminary data points to multiple precincts. Maybe more. You'll have full federal clearance." She hung up, eyes distant for a second. Then she looked at Davis. "It's spreading again." Davis frowned. "You think it ever really stopped?" Rachel stood and moved toward the window. The city shimmered below, alive but restless. Corruption doesn't stop. It just changes uniforms. Davis watched her gather her files, her movement slow but deliberate. "You could walk away, you know, after everything. No one would blame you." Rachel turned, her eyes steady. "That's what they count on, that people get tired." She slipped her files into a leather case. "I don't get tired. I get proof." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, faint but coming closer. Davis stood. "Then I guess I'll see you in Monroe." "You sure?" Rachel asked. "Yeah," Davis said, smiling. "Somebody's got to make sure you don't scare every cop in the state." Rachel laughed softly. "I don't scare them. The truth does." They left the office together, walking through the long federal hallway lined with portraits of lawyers and judges who had fought the same battles decades before. The air smelled faintly of rain. By the time they reached the parking garage, the storm had arrived. Sheets of water poured down, thunder cracking across the skyline. Rachel paused by her car, looking out at the lightning illuminating the city she'd just helped to rebuild. "It never ends," Davis said, pulling up her collar. "That's the point," Rachel replied. "Justice isn't a finish line. It's a direction." They exchanged a final look, a silent pact between two women who had seen too much to turn away now. Rachel got into her car, the wipers starting their rhythmic sweep across the windshield. The road ahead shimmered with reflection and promise. Her phone buzzed again, an incoming file from the Deputy Attorney General. Case designation, Operation Clean Badge 2. She opened it, scanning the first page. Another town, another department, another start. Her jaw set with quiet resolve. "All right," she whispered. "Let's begin again." The car rolled forward into the storm, headlights cutting through the rain. The city faded behind her, replaced by open highway and darkness ahead. But to Rachel Carter, darkness was just another place to bring the light. The storm roared. The rain fell harder. And in the distance, the faint sound of sirens began once more, not as a warning this time, but as an answer. Justice was moving again.